August 10th, 1993. Southern Siberia. A group of Ukrainian kayakers drifts lazily downstream, their paddles slicing through water as clear as glass. It should have been the kind of day that lives forever in memory. Sunlight on the river, forest air sharp in their lungs. But what they saw on the banks that morning would follow them like a curse for the rest of their lives. From the tree line, a figure emerged. A teenage girl, motionless, staring at them with empty eyes. Her face swollen with insect bites, her body filthy and torn. The kayakers froze, their laughter collapsing into silence. As they drew closer, their stomachs turned to stone. The girl wasn't just exhausted or lost. She looked as though she had walked out of some unseen catastrophe. Her name was Valentina Utochenko. She was only 17. And she was the sole survivor of one of the most disturbing tragedies in modern Russia. A mystery still unsolved 3 decades later. She should have been with 6 teammates and her trusted instructor. Instead, she was alone, broken, and half-mad with terror. When the kayakers tried to speak to her, some say she screamed like an animal. Others say she just stared through them, as if she no longer belonged to this world. When they finally coaxed words out of her, the kayakers were chilled to their core. Valentina whispered that her teammates, strong, young, healthy hikers, were dead in the mountains, and she didn't know why. When she reached the police, her story should have sparked an urgent rescue mission. Instead, the response was painfully slow, almost deliberate. The Russian state waited 19 days before helicopters were dispatched to retrieve the bodies. By then, evidence was gone. Decomposed, washed away, or conveniently untraceable. An accident? Or something darker? Even in her ruined state, Valentina's haunted appearance and fractured account smelled of more than just bad weather. This wasn't a simple hiking disaster. It reeked of secrecy, of Cold War shadows lingering in the Siberian mountains. And as history has taught us, when the Russian military has something to hide, the truth is often the first casualty. To understand how the Khamar-Daban tragedy could unfold, we must first look at the woman who led the doomed expedition, Lyudmila Korovina. Korovina was no ordinary hiking instructor. At 41, she carried the title Master of Sports in Hiking, a designation born out of the Soviet Union's obsession with discipline, endurance, and strength. In the Cold War era, outdoor training was not just recreation, it was survival schooling. Soviet sport and military preparation often overlapped, producing athletes who could endure conditions almost indistinguishable from battlefield training. Korovina was a product of this system. She was respected, even feared, for pushing her students to their breaking points, believing hardship was the only true teacher. Her team in August 1993 reflected her legacy. 6 young hikers, bonded by months of rigorous training, saw her not just as an instructor, but as a mentor. There was Alexander, 23, her most trusted protege. Tatiana, 24, strong and determined. Dennis, 19, eager to prove himself. And the youngest 3, Valentina, 17, Victoria, 16, and Timur, just 15. Despite their youth, they had already endured challenges that would have broken casual hikers. Together, they were not reckless amateurs, but a tight-knit unit forged in discipline and trust. Their expedition was supposed to be routine, a circuit across familiar peaks and valleys. But routine in Siberia can be deceptive. The Khamar-Daban range, with its steep ridges, sudden storms, and unpredictable weather was both breathtaking and unforgiving. It was a place where skill could mean survival, and a single mistake could cost everything. The hikers could not have known that while they set out chasing adventure, they were walking into mountains where sport and survival had long been tested, and where the line between safety and disaster was thinner than anyone could imagine. On the morning of August 2nd, 1993, in the height of summer, the 7 hikers stepped off the train in the village of Murino. Their boots struck gravel with practiced precision, their packs neatly packed, their faces lit with the quiet excitement of young adventurers. They were not alone in the mountains that season. Another group, led by Korovina's own daughter, was hiking a separate route through the Khamar-Daban. The 2 teams had planned to meet at a certain point, to share a meal and cross paths before continuing their journeys. Siberia stretched before them, vast, rugged, and indifferent. For them, it was not an enemy, but a challenge. Under Ludmila Korovina's stern eye, they had been trained to face hardship with discipline. Laughter mixed with determination as they began their climb, their movements almost military in their order. For the first 2 days, everything went according to plan. The group moved quickly, faster than expected, ascending towards the high ridges of the Khamar-Daban. Their spirits were high. Each step was another victory. Each ridge crossed a small triumph. Valentina would later recall those early days with a bittersweet tone. The camaraderie, the shared meals, the quiet confidence that nothing could go wrong under Korovina's watch. But Siberia is a land that demands respect. By August 4th, their optimism collided with the brutal truth of the mountains. Dark clouds gathered with unnatural speed, swallowing the horizon. The air grew sharp, winds howling down the slopes with a force that tore at their tents and clothing. Sheets of freezing rain lashed across the ridges, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Trees bent, branches snapped, and the storm seemed to carry with it more than just rain. It felt alive, oppressive, as if the mountain itself had turned hostile. That night was a torment. Their tents flapped violently in the wind, the soil beneath them turning to cold mud. Few slept. Their fires sputtered, refusing to catch, leaving the group huddled together, shivering, waiting for dawn. The storm's fury only eased by morning, leaving behind an unsettling silence. The kind of silence that presses against the ears, too complete, too unnatural. What none of them realized was that storms in Siberia didn't just bring water and wind. The rain washed across slopes where, for decades, Soviet forces had tested weapons never admitted to the outside world. Chemical remnants, gases heavier than air, seeped into valleys and crept along the ground, waiting to be disturbed. As the hikers packed up to begin their descent, the mountains seemed calm again. But under that calm lingered something invisible, something born not of nature, but of secrecy. Something the storm may have awakened. Valentina's testimony begins quietly. The morning after the storm, the group packed their soaked gear and started the descent. The air was crisp, the silence heavy, but nothing suggested the nightmare about to erupt. They had walked only a short time when Alexander, the strongest of the group, suddenly screamed. His cry ripped through the mountain air like a warning shot. Valentina turned and froze. Blood was streaming from his eyes, his mouth, his nose. Foam bubbled at his lips. His body convulsed violently, jerking against the earth, then collapsed. Ludmila, the instructor who had faced storms and danger without fear, rushed to him. This was a woman carved from steel, forged in the Soviet system. But within seconds of reaching Alexander, her body betrayed her. She cried out, blood spilling from her face, her chest heaving as convulsions tore through her. The leader fell, collapsing across her student's body. Tatiana, loyal and strong, sprinted forward. She dropped beside her instructor. For one moment it seemed she might help. Instead, her hands shot to her throat. Her eyes widened in terror. She clawed at her neck, desperate for air. Valentina remembered the sound, the rasping, animal gasp. Then the unthinkable. Tatiana dragged herself to a rock and smashed her head against it, again and again, until she went limp. By now, chaos ruled the slope. Dennis bolted behind a boulder, trying to hide. Victoria and Timur ran downhill, frantic, their cries piercing the silence. But whatever invisible force had struck Alexander, Ludmila, and Tatiana, it found them too. Their bodies convulsed, their hands tore at their clothes, stripping in the freezing air. They staggered, choked, vomited blood, then collapsed in the mud, one by one, like soldiers in a war they never signed up for. Valentina stood paralyzed. Within minutes, 6 people lay dead. No attacker, no warning. No sound but the final echoes of their agony. And yet the symptoms told their own story. Not the slow creep of cold, not the confusion of hunger, but the brutal, rapid signature of something else. Foaming at the mouth, convulsions, bleeding, clawing at the throat as lungs filled with fluid. These were not hikers dying in nature's arms. These were victims of something that looked far more like a battlefield weapon. 17-year-old Valentina, the last one standing, was left alone in a scene that looked less like a hiking accident. When the chaos ended, silence returned to the slope. 6 bodies lay scattered in the mud. Only Valentina remained, 17 years old, standing in a nightmare that no one could ever have prepared her for. Her instincts screamed at her to run, and so she did. She stumbled downhill through brush and rocks, the mountains swallowing her sobs. Every step felt like a betrayal, leaving her teammates behind. But survival demanded movement. Still, hunger gnawed at her. Fear pressed harder, and she knew she would not last long without supplies. So Valentina did the unthinkable. She climbed back, but not immediately. That first night, shattered and trembling, she managed to curl beneath the shelter of a tree, drifting in and out of broken sleep, haunted by screams that would never leave her. Only the next day, with her body aching and her stomach gnawing at itself, did she force herself to return, back to the clearing where her teammates had died. Their bodies were still there, twisted, frozen in agony. She forced herself not to look at their faces as she rummaged through their packs. Food, a tent, anything she could carry. Every zipper opened, every hand plunged into a bag, brought a wave of guilt so heavy it nearly crushed her. She was stealing from the dead, from children who had trusted her. But if she did not take what they no longer needed, she too would join them. With supplies in hand, she fled again, this time deeper into the forest. She followed the only clue that might lead to civilization, the power lines that snaked across the ridges. Barefoot, exhausted, her feet torn and bleeding, she walked. Days blurred together. Hunger weakened her. Insects bit her skin raw. Sleep came only in fits, her dreams haunted by the screams of her friends. 4 days passed before salvation appeared. Ukrainian kayakers spotted her on the riverbank. Thin, hollow-eyed, her body covered in dirt and blood. A girl who should have been at school now looked like a prisoner who had escaped some unspoken war. Valentina survived, but survival was its own punishment. She became the lone witness to a story buried in secrecy, the only voice left in a tragedy the world was never meant to hear. When Valentina staggered into the police station, she expected immediate action. A young girl, barely alive, reporting that 6 of her companions were dead in the mountains. Anywhere else, the news would have launched an instant rescue. Helicopters, medical teams, search units scrambling into the wilderness. But this was post-Soviet Russia. Instead of urgency, there was silence, paperwork, shrugs, delay. Days passed, then weeks. Only on the 19th day after the tragedy did helicopters finally sweep the mountains. By then, the bodies of Ludmila and her students were already decomposing. Evidence that might have revealed the truth, gone forever. The contrast was striking. When military aircraft went down, when submarines suffered accidents, the Soviet state moved with ruthless speed. Secrets were protected, wreckage recovered, witnesses silenced. But here, with 7 civilians, children even, the response dragged on until nothing useful could be learned. It felt less like incompetence and more like design. Perhaps the authorities already knew what had killed those hikers. Perhaps the storm had stirred up something they themselves had left behind. A chemical, a gas, the residue of experiments never meant to see the light of day. If so, then the last thing they wanted was a quick investigation. Better to wait. Better to let the elements erase the truth. Officially, the deaths were written off as hypothermia. Unofficially, the silence of the state spoke volumes. In Siberia, where military secrets were buried in the earth itself, the fate of 7 hikers was just another casualty. Not of weather, not of chance, but of secrecy. When the bodies were finally brought down from the mountain, the official report seemed almost insultingly simple. Cause of death, hypothermia. Nothing more. No mention of horror, no mention of violence, just cold weather in the middle of August. But when details of the autopsies leaked, the truth told a darker story. All 6 hikers showed bruised lungs. In medical terms, pulmonary bruising and edema. Fluid filling the lungs. That is not the mark of a hiker slowly freezing. It is the mark of someone gasping for air, drowning inside their own chest. Several showed protein deficiency in their muscles, as though their bodies had been breaking down unnaturally fast. Strange, given that they had only been on the mountain for a few days and had packed enough food. Others had foam in their airways, a classic sign of suffocation by chemical exposure. Even more bizarre, some of the hikers were found partially undressed, their boots or jackets removed, lying barefoot in the dirt. The Russian state called this paradoxical undressing, a symptom seen in hypothermia, where victims feel burning heat in their final moments. But these were young athletes, fit and prepared, who had survived worse conditions before. For them all to collapse within minutes, stripping their clothes in unison, it defied every rule of wilderness survival. And then there was the silence of the mountain itself. The recovery teams noted the absence of birds, animals, even insects around the clearing where the bodies lay. A Siberian summer forest without wildlife. unnatural, unsettling, as if nature itself recoiled from that place. Each anomaly alone might have been dismissed. Together, they built a picture that matched another, far more sinister possibility. Foam at the mouth, convulsions, bleeding from eyes and nose, bruised lungs, rapid collapse. These were not the signs of hypothermia. They were the textbook symptoms of nerve agent exposure. Agents like VX, or worse, the secret Soviet creation known as Novichok. During the Cold War, Novichok was designed to be deadlier than anything the West possessed. A substance that could kill within minutes, from a drop on the skin, a whiff in the air. And where had the Soviets tested it? Remote regions of Siberia, the very mountains where Ludmila's group made their final camp. So why did the autopsies conclude hypothermia? Perhaps because the alternative was unthinkable. To admit that a group of children had wandered into a contaminated zone. To admit that the Soviet military had left behind a weapon that killed civilians in peacetime. No. Better to call it hypothermia. Better to erase the evidence, delay the search, let the bodies rot. Better to bury the truth beneath paperwork and silence. The official story ended with the cold. The real story, it reeked of chemical warfare. To understand what happened on that slope in 1993, we have to look beyond the hikers and into the long shadow of the Cold War. For decades, Siberia was more than wilderness. It was the Soviet Union's laboratory. Vast, empty, uninhabited valleys became test sites for weapons that were never meant to be acknowledged. Rockets, biological agents, chemical toxins, experiments that left scars not on maps, but on people. Scars often erased from the official record. The region around Lake Baikal, the world's deepest freshwater lake, was treated less like a treasure of nature and more like a convenient dumping ground. Reports have surfaced of toxic waste barrels sinking beneath its waters, leaking poisons into one of the planet's most fragile ecosystems. If the Soviets could pollute Baikal without hesitation, what would stop them from leaving chemical remnants scattered across remote mountain ridges? Whispers from the 1980s and early 90s tell of chemical testing in Siberia, just as the Soviet state was crumbling. Projects rushed, containment sloppy, secrecy absolute. Locals spoke of strange illnesses, sudden wildlife die-offs, unexplained military convoys moving through the forests at night. None of it ever confirmed, but none of it ever denied. And here lies the difference. In the United States, decades after Vietnam, the government finally declassified the horrors of Agent Orange. Atomic test sites, once secret, were acknowledged. Documents surfaced, victims named, compensation paid, however late. Transparency, however painful, became a form of closure. But Russia has remained silent. No documents, no investigations. Just the same flat story. Hikers died of hypothermia. A fiction repeated so many times, it became the official truth. That silence speaks louder than words. Because the Khamar-Daban tragedy was not just 7 hikers caught in a storm. It was the human cost of secrecy, of military shadows cast over innocent lives. Children and young adults, led by a respected instructor, reduced to collateral damage in a war they never chose. And like so many Cold War tragedies, their story was buried, not because it lacked answers, but because the answers were too dangerous to admit. When investigators finally addressed the tragedy, a handful of explanations were offered. Each sounded neat on paper, but none could survive close scrutiny. The first was hypothermia. Easy, familiar, a tidy answer for bodies found in the cold. But this was August. The hikers had survived storms before. They carried food, tents, even sealed bags of warm clothing they never opened. Hypothermia is a slow thief. It does not strike 6 people within minutes, leaving them convulsing and bleeding. Another theory was mushroom poisoning. Ludmila often foraged in the wild. Perhaps she chose the wrong fungus. But the symptoms didn't match. No vomiting, no gradual nausea. Instead, the hikers fell like dominoes. Violent seizures, foaming mouths, lungs filling with fluid. Besides, autopsies found no trace of mushrooms in their stomachs. Some whispered about infrasound, low frequencies caused by wind in the mountains. In rare cases, it can trigger panic, confusion, even hallucinations. But infrasound does not cause blood to pour from eyes. It does not leave bruised lungs or foam in the airways. It cannot kill 6 young people in the space of minutes. Each alternative theory collapses under its own weight. What remains is the explanation everyone fears: chemical exposure. The symptoms fit: convulsions, sudden collapse, frothing, bleeding. The pulmonary trauma revealed in the autopsies. This was not nature at work. It was the signature of a nerve agent. Why did Valentina survive? Perhaps by luck alone. Maybe she stood just beyond the densest pocket of gas, inhaled less, moved quickly downhill while the others fell. Nerve agents can kill in seconds, but sometimes a survivor emerges, not unharmed, but alive. And what of her silence? After her rescue, Valentina spoke briefly, then retreated into decades of quiet. Trauma explains part of it, but in Russia, silence is often more than personal. Survivors are reminded, firmly, not to contradict the official story, not to question the state. So the record stands. Hypothermia. Nothing more. And yet, every detail whispers otherwise. A cover-up. A shadow of military secrecy cast across a tragedy the world was never meant to understand. The Khamar-Daban tragedy is not an isolated mystery. It stands in the same shadow as the Dyatlov Pass disaster. Another group of young hikers who died in Siberia under circumstances the Soviet state never fully explained. Different mountains, different years, the same silence, the same refusal to admit the presence of military secrets hidden in the wilderness. Russia has a culture of silence when it comes to its ghosts. Families of the victims never speak. Valentina, the sole survivor, withdrew from public life for decades. And when she did finally speak, her words shifted, softened, fragmented, as if shaped by trauma, or perhaps by pressure. In a land where truth is dangerous, silence often becomes the only form of survival. And so the Khamar-Daban mountains remain what they were during the Cold War, a battlefield. Not one of armies and soldiers, but of secrecy and denial. A place where the casualties were not warriors. They were children, innocent, ambitious, disciplined, sacrificed to experiments and cover-ups they never even knew existed. That is the true horror of this story. The mountain was not their enemy. The storm was not their executioner. It was the shadow of war, the invisible hand of a state willing to bury its mistakes, even if it meant burying its youth. And the question that lingers, if this could happen in Siberia, if 7 lives could be lost and silenced so easily, how many other Cold War ghosts remain buried? How many tragedies remain hidden, locked away in classified files, waiting to be forgotten? The mountains keep their secrets. But secrets like these never stay buried forever. The Khamar-Daban tragedy. Was it weather, madness, or a Cold War weapon no one was meant to survive? What do you believe? Comment your theory below. I'll be reading them. And don't forget to subscribe to Wartime Phantoms, where the ghosts of war are never silent.